she lied on the boy's body to keep him under control while she called his caseworker. That act would have devastating consequences. While Wilson sat on his less than 95-pound body, Dakota screamed and then stopped moving.
Hey, Charisma here. Welcome back to Charisma Daily. A 340-pound woman is accused of killing foster son. Hey, Charisma here. Welcome back to Charisma Daily. A 340-pound woman is accused of killing her foster son by sitting on him for acting up. An Indiana woman is accused of causing her foster son's death by sitting on him for several minutes. Jennifer Lee Wilson, a 340-pound woman, allegedly suffocated 10-year-old Dakota Levi Stevens by sitting on him as punishment for acting up after he tried to escape her home. I wonder why he tried to escape her home. Investigators obtained a doorbell camera footage of the incident, showing Wilson on the boy for at least 5 minutes. Wilson was charged with reckless homicide after Stevens died at the hospital. Law&Crime's Elizabeth Millner breaks down the shocking case. Let's take a listen.
Have to happen. Right? This did not have to happen. He didn't have to die. He just wasn't being monitored by someone that actually cared about him.
An Indiana foster mother gets locked up as she now faces charges in connection to the death of her foster child. 48-year-old Jennifer Lee Wilson is charged with reckless homicide for the death of her foster son, Dakota Stevens. The case unfolded in April of this year when young Dakota was rushed to the hospital. Wilson reportedly told investigators the 10-year-old ran away earlier that day, and she brought the boy home after finding him at a neighbor's home. After they returned to Wilson's home, Dakota reportedly was acting up and threw himself on the ground. According to the Indy Star, Dakota was placed in Wilson's care just a month prior.
You know, I want to be on that same benefit of the doubt. You know, the fact that the two didn't really know each other. But my problem is that she's supposed to be a foster parent. She's supposed to have been vetted to conduct herself appropriately and to understand the traumas that children like this, not just the person in her home at that time, but all of the children that are in the foster system are dealing with a lot more than a typical child would be. So the expectation should have been that she would have known how to manage this child, no matter what the child was doing, no matter what the behaviors were. She should have been vetted already to know what to do in cases like this.
While the young boy was on the ground, Wilson told police she lied on the boy's body to keep him under control while she called his caseworker. That act would have devastating consequences. While Wilson sat on his less than 95-pound body, Dakota screamed and then stopped moving. Wilson reportedly told police she thought Dakota was faking, but when she rolled him over, his eyelids were pale.
It's almost unbelievable. I mean, once you start looking at, how all of this unfolded and the decisions that were made by the adults, not the alleged killer in this case, but all of the adults that are surrounding this child who are supposed to protect him. I mean, it's just a tragedy all around.
Wilson would tell authorities she sat on top of Dakota for about 5 minutes.
Five
Dr. John Delatory, a
minutes.
forensic psychologist, explains Wilson's quest for authority would have tragic consequences.
I don't know that she thought it was a good idea. I think what she was thinking was probably something along the lines of, I need to throw my weight around. I need to get authority back, right? That the literal throw my weight around. The reality is that it didn't matter how much she weighed. The fact that she put herself on top of this child suggests to me that she was ill-prepared to manage these kinds of extreme behaviors that a child in the foster care system would have been experiencing. But the problem is that all these children in foster care systems are experiencing extreme behaviors because of all the things that they've already been subjected to, even to that point.
Dakota was airlifted from a hospital in Porter County, Indiana, to South Bend, Indiana, where he was ultimately taken off life support. The doctor's
Jesus.
findings would piece together more clues into the young boy's final moments. They found swelling on his brain, which was consistent with oxygen deprivation for an extended period of time. And young Dakota was pronounced dead. The St. Joseph County Coroner's Office would rule the 10-year-old's death as a homicide, and his cause of death would be mechanical asphyxia, an asphyxiation where a physical force or object stops a person from breathing.
I can't even put words into it. I don't know what this child would have been experiencing. I know it would have been terrible. I mean, terrible isn't even the right word to describe what this child would have been going through. Never in his life did he ever think that he was safe. And everything was taken out of him. Literally, his breath was taken from him. And just how awful that is when you experience it as an adult, when you lose your wind, right? When you get the wind knocked out of you, just the prolonged torture that it would have been for him to go through, not only through his life, but during those last moments.
But nearby home surveillance video would reveal more into Dakota's tragic death. Really quick, I want to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime YouTube takeover. Law firm can help. Only pay them. According to police, a 20-second clip from a Ring camera video showed Wilson lying across Dakota's neck and head area as he screamed. Then another video reportedly showed Dakota still screaming while Wilson, who weighed nearly 350 pounds, was on top of him with her right arm and elbow planted on the ground. A third video then shows Wilson still on top of Dakota near his bottom, while the 10-year-old whose arms were above his head showed he was no longer moving. A fourth video reportedly showed Dakota and Wilson still in the same position while Dakota was still not moving. Then a fifth video showed Wilson on her knee facing Dakota while he was face down on the ground. Upon realizing the young child wasn't moving, Wilson reportedly shouted his name several times and asked her other children to call 911.
Well, I think
So you're 340 pounds and you sit on a child that's less than 100 pounds, 95 pounds, and you don't think that it's not going to have any kind of repercussions? Really? All the children that you have, whether they're your children biologically or their foster children, should be taken from you because you are an unfit mother. You're evil and demonic, and you do not deserve to have children in your lives. Honestly, you do not deserve. You sat your big fat ass on top of the little child, and you don't think it was going to hurt him. What? Come on.
part of it was probably she had tunnel vision. I think she probably thought that she needed to gain control of the situation right then and there. And once she made that decision, the rest of the environment kind of faded away. I'm not really sure that she truly recognized that she was doing it in front of everybody. I think she knew where she was. I just don't know that. I just don't know that the environment was influencing her the way that it should have been doing. And when it comes to inside the house, I mean, that's the thing is if she's willing to engage in that kind of pseudo disciplinary behavior on the outside, then she's clearly willing to engage in pseudo disciplinary behavior inside the home when no one else is watching.
Mm-hmm. The 10-year-old reportedly sought out for help prior to his tragic death. Officers say they made contact with a neighbor who said Dakota ran to her house about 30 minutes before emergency crews arrived. The neighbor told investigators the young boy asked her to adopt him because his parents hit him in the face and didn't let him call his caseworker.
Wow.
But the neighbor reportedly didn't see any visible injuries on Dakota. However, as Dr. Delatorre explains, the use in foster homes is a lot more prevalent than we may recognize.
Mm-hmm. And here we go. Another person, another human being, another adult failed this child. He asked, he reached out for help. He cried out for help. He sought help from this monster. And yet his cries went unheard. And tragically, 30 minutes later, his life would have been taken from him. What a crying shame. We as human beings, we need to do better. Honestly, we need to do better, especially when it comes to children and animals. We need to do better.
I think that problem is twofold. I think There are situations in which child and family services, however, each state has a different name for it, but we'll just call it child and family services. Um, how each state is funding that program, that agency within its state. I think there's also a problem with the number of cases that each case manager would have. I think there's also a problem with the number of foster parents and appropriate foster parents. And people talk about should parents have parental training before they have a
Mm.
child. The reality is that these foster parents probably do need parental training
Hmm.
before they have a foster child. So I think that society in and of itself has to start dealing with the fact that if we are to claim that we are a family first country, then we need to make sure that we are funding the programs in which children can actually be safe.
And
Hmm.
here's what else we know about Dakota Stevens. Dakota was placed in Wilson's care about a month prior to his death. And before that, he had reportedly spent the last 5 years of his life moving around to different foster homes.
Wow.
According to Indy Star, Dakota's parents lost custody of him and his younger sister in 2018 after the Department of Children's Services concluded his parents were unable to care for the children.
Jesus.
According to the outlet, other family members have tried unsuccessfully for several years to gain custody of him and remove him from the foster care system. Dr. Delatorre says Dakota's unstable home life, like many other children in the foster care system, make them very vulnerable.
No.
But I
Yeah.
can't imagine that it does anything good. I mean, the reality is that a lot of these children deal with lingering trauma
Hmm.
effects, that they deal a lot with substance abuse as they get older, a lot of depression, anxiety, right? That they find themselves in other relationships as they get older that are just as abusive. I mean, these
Hmm.
kinds of things have long lasting effects that they don't understand at the time that they are happening. The adults do, the adults should know. And so the adults should be considering their behaviors when they're interacting with these children. They're already vulnerable. Every child
Yeah.
is vulnerable, but these children in particular are already vulnerable. And the exposure and the long-term exposure and the long-term consequences of these traumas that they're experiencing, I mean, there's too many consequences to really list out.
Jennifer Wilson was arrested across state lines in Michigan after a warrant was issued and she was charged with reckless homicide, a
Are we
charge
trying
that
to run?
reportedly carries a sentence of up to 6 years in prison as a level 5 felony.
Yeah, prosecutors decide, how they're going to charge. They do that for any
6
using
years.
a calculus that only really they know. They have to present the case. They have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. That they probably don't think that there's an actual malicious intent, right? The criminal intent
Really?
associated with murder or something like that, or at least that they don't have the evidence to prove that. I mean, sometimes I think that the person's underlying motives should be included into the presentation of the case, but that's not the law, right? And so we have to really think about, we have these laws in place for a certain reason. And if we think that the laws aren't representative of who we are as a society today, then you know what? Maybe we should change them.
While Wilson now faces a charge of reckless homicide, many questions still remain in the case, including why did this happen and what more can be done to protect children who are within the system.
I think it's important to understand that there are a lot of services for families that go underfunded, and a lot of the workers in them are overworked. Some of them are to blame for a lot of these consequences, but I think if we were more considerate as to how we are giving them the resources necessary for all individuals to ensure that children this didn't have to happen, right?
Yeah.
This did not have to happen. He didn't have to die. He just wasn't being monitored by someone that actually cared about it.
And there you have it. He didn't have to die. This was avoidable on so many different levels. If his other relatives were trying to get him out of the foster care, why weren't they given to them? Why wasn't custody given to them? He could have been alive today as opposed to being his life taken by such a monster. And 6 years or 5 years is not enough for what she did. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was aiming, what, you're going to 340 pounds? You can sit on a 95-pound child and you don't think that it's going to hurt and there's going to be permanent damage from you sitting on a child. Really? Come on. I want to hear from you. I want to hear what you think about this case. I don't think 5 years was enough for this woman because I think it was intentional to hurt this child. She should have been facing at least 20 years or more.